How's it going, guys? This is your Supply Chain Pro here, and in today's video, we're going to be exploring progressive discipline in the workplace. The purpose of progressive discipline at an employer is a documented and increasingly step-by-step process to address employee performance or behavior issues. The goal is to stop behavior of something that shouldn't be happening or start behavior of something that should be happening and is not. Using an example, most employers have attendance policies. If all company employees did not show up on the same Tuesday, for example, that employer would not be able to function for that day. Attendance is directly correlated with work performance. Different employers have different specifics as it relates to their attendance policies. Some use a point system while some may use a different subjective approach. Some set their threshold high at 12 infractions and some may set it lower at 6 infractions. But at the end of the day, there's a policy that the company puts out and all employees have to follow. When an employee misses work and commits a recordable attendance infraction, the company must apply the attendance policy fairly across the board to this employee the same way they apply it to every employee in the company. When an employer administers discipline, you'll probably recognize this as what is called a write-up in the supply chain industry. It could be a verbal write-up or a written warning or some common summary terms used to communicate discipline such as a disciplinary action. What the employer is actually doing is documenting the conversation and notifying the employee that they are falling short of the company's expectations as compared to the policy. There are no set or required amount of progressive disciplinary steps. Some companies may be more patient and set the steps to 9 before reaching the end, while some companies may have a very streamlined and rapid progression, only allowing 3 or 4 documented conversations in the process. Normally, they progress as follows. Step 1 is a verbal warning, Step 2 is a written warning, and Step 3 is a final warning. So let's look at an example of an employee named Steve. According to the company policy, all employees are required to wear a shirt while they're on the job. And on Monday, Steve shows up to his job without a shirt and doesn't put a shirt on by midway through his shift, breaking this company policy. Steve completed his training upon being hired, and he knows that he's supposed to wear a shirt, but for some reason, he does not have one today. Now, there are a variety of reasons why Steve may not have his shirt today. His shirt could be in the wash and he doesn't have it, or he could have had an emergency at his home, or maybe his shirt was destroyed, or it got lost, or maybe Steve disagrees with the morality of the shirt policy at his employer, and he's choosing not to wear one as an act of defiance. Regardless of the reason, Steve is here today without a shirt, breaking the policy and thus eligible for disciplinary action. Steve's manager, Jim, speaks with Steve regarding the shirt policy and understands that Steve is not following the rules today. Jim decides to administer the first progressive step in the progressive disciplinary process. We will call this a verbal write-up. At the conclusion of the conversation, Steve has been told that he is expected to wear his shirt when he is on the clock at the job. The next week on Wednesday, Steve shows back up to the job without a shirt again. Jim observes Steve going shirtless, breaking the company policy again, and has the next progressive disciplinary conversation, which would be a written warning. At the end of the conversation, Steve is told that he is expected to wear his shirt while he's on the clock and he must follow the company shirt policy again. A week later, on Wednesday, Steve shows up again at his job without his shirt after already having 2 progressive disciplinary conversations with Jim on this same topic. Jim sees Steve without a shirt and prepares to administer a final written warning. Jim has the documented conversation and Steve is given a final written warning. 2 weeks go by and Steve shows up again on a Friday without his shirt. Jim has given 3 progressive disciplinary warnings to Steve, and Steve has failed to change his behavior as it relates to the company's mandatory shirt policy. It is at this time that Jim could make the decision to fire Steve. If Jim were to fire Steve, the company would have an abundance of documentation on Steve's continued violations of the company policy. Each state law can be a little different than the next. However, as a general template, in the event that Steve wanted to bring a lawsuit against the company for wrongful termination, Jim's company would have an abundance of occurrences where Steve was made aware of the policy and failed to change his behavior to comply with it. The most difficult part of the disciplinary process can be the emotions that are involved in the conversations between the employee and the boss. Write-ups are formal and official criticisms of someone's conduct or performance while on the job, and different people respond differently to criticism. Different bosses can also give criticism in different ways. Overall, this can be an emotional experience for both parties. The best thing that both sides can do in this conversation is to stick to the facts and keep your emotions to the side. It's easy to jump to conclusions and it's easy to get upset, but ultimately it's in everyone's best interest to remain calm and focus on complying with the policy going forward. If you have questions or concerns about one of your company's policies, your Supply Chain Pro's tip is to be proactive in reaching out to your boss. It is better to understand a policy and ask questions ahead of time than have to learn about it through the write-up process. Like, comment, and subscribe if you found any of this information useful or if you have additional insight on this topic that was not covered in today's video. This is your Supply Chain Pro, out.